Hi, this is Dave from Motels.com, and I'm here to walk you through this lovely 1997 press book. And the thing to think about here when you look at it is that until very recently, Chrysler had been going downhill. It looked like it was impossible to avoid bankruptcy even. And then starting in 1993, they started coming out with new products that just wowed the critics and the customers alike. And so they had some right to be a little bit giddy in their press materials as in anything else. They were firing on all cylinders, they were incredibly profitable, and they had a corporate culture that everybody wanted to emulate, along with a technology center that every other automaker wanted. They were really at the top of their game around 1997 and early 1998, and this is their story that they wanted to tell. So in 1997, they had basically turned over every single product in their entire portfolio, and that's when they issued this Drive the Showroom press book. And it was very unusual in its whimsicality. Their past press books had been pretty bland. In the early 90s, they had really been quite cheap and very short on detail. And then as the LH cars were developed, they really started going into a lot more detail on what was new and what was unique and what was innovative. And it was a really big switch. And then they started to get kind of fun, as you see here. They also had a lot more money to spend on their press materials, and that's how they could go to this interesting format with a bunch of different individual color brochures stuffed into a pocket. So we start out with the neon, which at the time was pretty revolutionary. People really forget that no American automaker was making money on their small cars when the neon came out. They were losing thousands per car. Then the neon came out and they had thousands of profit per car while outperforming every competitor, including Honda. It was really pretty amazing. And then we also had their minivans, which had leapfrogged the competition in 1996. And that was their first truly new generation, designed from the ground up to be a minivan, not just something that was taken from a K car and then modified heavily. This was the first really new minivan designed from the start to be just that. Then there was the Breeze, which was really kind of an afterthought. They had not given any of their bread and butter mid-size family sedans to Plymouth, and they really should have. It was kind of crazy to give one to Chrysler but not to Plymouth, and so belatedly they gave Plymouth the Breeze, and that was only available with the smallest engine, a 2-liter engine from the Neon, putting out 150 horsepower, and it was kind of stripped down, the value model. You were really supposed to get a Cirrus or Stratus. And then there was, and keeping in mind I'm using their order, not my own, which would have made sense, but theirs, which seems almost random, the Eagle Vision, which is the big LH car like the Dodge Intrepid or Chrysler LHS or Chrysler Concorde. This was a sportier tuned version. It had the big engine starting in 1997, a 3.5 liter. It started out with the 3.3, but it always had a sportier tune to it, and it was marketed to people who would normally buy an imported car, although the number of people buying full-size imported cars then was probably fairly small. These cars were all very popular, the Eagle Vision, the Dodge Intrepid, the Chrysler Concorde. Then we had the Eagle Talon. This was not really imported, but it was for people who liked imported cars. It was a Mitsubishi Eclipse with body styling by Chrysler Corporation. And what was interesting was that they were already using a neon engine in it at that point. And as I recall, it was hailed as a big deal because it was the first Japanese car to use an American engine in a few decades. Next up, we have the Chrysler Concorde. This was Chrysler's LH car. For 97, they got the 3.5 engine standard. Again, it originally came out with a 3.3. And again, I really can't tell you what a big difference this was. For large cars when it came out, it just felt completely different. It had great cornering and handling and feel compared to the older style large cars, which really hadn't been changed much since the 50s or 60s. And it was a huge break from the K cars that Chrysler had been making, so much so that when the New York Times reviewed it, the stock actually went up by a factor of 4 within a couple of weeks. And then we have the Sebring convertible, which was also a big deal when it was launched because it was the first car in quite some time made in America, designed to be a convertible from the ground up, actually created as a convertible and not as a coupe and then having its roof cut off by somebody else later. It was really the best convertible, and it was acknowledged as such by pretty much all the critics, and yet it wasn't that expensive. It didn't cost that much more than the Chrysler, Cirrus sedan did at that point. So it was quite the vehicle, and it was a fun drive. Looked good, too. The Sebring Coupe was another Mitsubishi Eclipse, and there's not much to say about that. The Town & Country, that was the Chrysler version of the Dodge Caravan and Plymouth Voyager minivan. It came very well equipped, and that was the big deal with it. It had the leather seats, it had a bunch of options were standard. It had the same suspension tuning as the Plymouth. It was designed for comfort, whereas Dodge had a stiffer suspension. Other than that, it was pretty much the same as the Plymouth and Dodge, but with a bunch of options as standard. And then we have the Chrysler Cirrus. That was basically a Dodge Stratus or Plymouth Breeze, but with originally the V6 was standard, and then they made the 4-cylinder as a low-cost option, and then the 4-cylinder became standard. Depending on the year, they juggled that a lot, but it was basically a pricier version of the Dodge Stratus and the Plymouth Breeze. And finally, we wrap it up with the Chrysler LHS, which was basically a Chrysler Concorde with more Chrysler in it. It came with the 3.5-liter engine standard from the start. It was, as you can see, a more expensive car than most of the others, and it had more luxury features from the start. It was supposed to be a comfortable car above all else. It wasn't really sport luxury like the Vision was and like the later 300M was. It was purely on luxury, and it was quite a nice car. They really hit the mark. Now, you might have noticed that we left out the Dodge Stratus sedan. We also left out a few other vehicles, and that's because they weren't in this brochure for whatever reason. So with this, they were really trying to get journalists out to take test drives in all these new vehicles. For the few who still thought of Chrysler as old and stodgy and stuck with K cars, and they're American, so they can't be innovative, and they can't feel good, and they can't handle well, they were still fighting with all these perceptions that were really outdated by this time. Well, I hope that you had a good time looking through this book with me. I remember I had a good time looking through it when it was new and fresh, and so was I. I look forward to seeing you at motels.com and on this YouTube channel.